Men, especially grown-up men, how are you pouring back into young men in your community? Is there a young man that needs conversation, that needs a dinner, that needs a hug from you? Is there a young man around you that can benefit from your wisdom? You're so self-consumed with growing and growing your company or aspiring to more and getting more success and starting a new business and all these things. Where in your life have you given back? When we see consistent media around mass shootings, each time you see one, I want you guys to feel compelled to, or have that prick your heart, not just in a, oh my God, shaking your head, the world is so sad kind of a way, but prick your heart in a way of thinking through something that you can do to help reach out to lost souls, reach out to hurting hearts. The world is just hurting, and we can allow these things to continue to further polarize us and push us in our partisan corners. Or we can say it stops today. And to the extent that I can make a difference in this space, that's what I'm going to do, and that's what I'm going to commit to. Hello and welcome back, family, to the Bastion of Critical Thinking. My name is Raven, thought leader, therapist, and theologian. Chill out. Okay. Yes, I have been gone quite a bit. I mean, it's been like 3 weeks, I think. So it's not that bad, but I hear you. I hear you. Hold your tomatoes. My bad. I've been in a rejuvenation period a bit, trying to get my thoughts together because I've been going through some things. But I am back, and I'm going to be more consistent in posting. And I have been. If you look at my track record, I am on a smooth once a week. This is the first time that I've gone a longer time without posting. So apologies there, but I hear you, and I'm back. So hey, family. Welcome. If you're new here, welcome. Have a seat. We call ourselves the Critical Thinkers around here. We call this place the Bastion of Critical Thinking. And we just like to dive through things within culture and faith and society. And we offer ways to reform them as well as critique. So we critique first, but then we offer ways to reform as well, because we never want to critique without also offering a hand of lifting up, right? So with that in mind, today's video, well, if you like that kind of a content, stick around, hang out, press subscribe, like, comment, because all of that stuff helps out with growing the channel. We're at 400 subscribers right now, which is wild. I mean, it's small, but I couldn't believe that we would actually get here. I did. I don't know. Whatever. I'm excited is the point. So with that in mind, also it's snowing here today. So if you're wondering, like, girl, you look hella comfy and cozy, it's because insert picture here. This is what it looks outside where I'm at right now. Or this is what it looks like, rather. So I'm kind of cozy, comfy, cute, because I'm like, let's just have some conversation and let's talk about some things that have been on my mind. And also let me get a video out, y'all, because I know I've been slacking. So let's get started. So if you clicked on this video, you recognize that this video will be about mass shooting. And I probably came into the video with much more glee than I should have, but it's also in part though, that's because I don't have any real intentions on making this a humdrum sad video, more than I want this to be an informative conversation with a therapist and proverbial client, right? As my audience, you are proverbially the client, in the sense that we're going to be talking about things through the therapeutic lens or from the lens of a therapist. And I'm going to give you my perspective as a therapist, right? And so sometimes I'll have the conversation through like a therapist client kind of a way, or style rather. And then sometimes I'll just be kind of giving you perspective as a therapist, right? As some of my professional acumen and offering my thoughts to it. So today we're going to be talking about mass shootings and the difficulty of them and why they're so prevalent and why the bulk of them are committed by young men and how we can address that. And I'm not ever pretending to be an expert on this issue area, not because I'm not well versed in it, especially as a therapist. I study this immensely. I read books every year, consistently, about boys and masculinity and malehood and what it is to be a man and the difficulties of it, but some of the problems and the social issues that masculinity and traditional masculinity has created for us. So I am well versed in that stuff, but I guess what I mean to say I'm broaching this conversation around mass shootings with such caution because I recognize that it's such a multi-layered issue, and it's a problem that cannot, as much as we want to relegate it to one thing. And I know that every time one of them happens, we immediately jump to our partisan positions around what the reason for it was. But the truth is, guys, there isn't just one smoking gun, no pun intended, that we can point to that point that creates or causes children or people, men in particular, to commit mass shootings. However, what we do know is, and what the statistics bear out explicitly, are that there are variables and there are factors that are consistent within these patterns of who commits them and where they're from and how they act and what they do and what some of their co-occurring problems are. And so we can look at those things, we can look at those numbers and draw some conclusions that I think are really, really useful. The reason I'm doing this conversation now is because, especially not on the tails of a more recent one, the last one, I can't think of the last one, but I didn't want to do this video on the tail of one because I didn't want to profitize or gain clicks from a recent shooting, right? And to gain clicks, use a shooting to gain clicks and gain notoriety. I actually want to have a substantive conversation about something that is actually pervasive and causing us collective trauma and collective pain, whether that be figuratively or literally, because it's almost become one of those things like, until it's your time, because it's so common and it's so frequent. At least it often feels like that too, right? That you just almost worry, like, will this be the day that I'm a part of one? Will this be the day that I'm a name in one? And that's a horrible way to live. And it's a completely unfair way to live too. And so I wanted to do this video and have just a substantive conversation about it, in somewhat of reflection of some of the ones that we've experienced, but also in a time that's not as polarized, meaning like when it first post happened, now everybody's all polarized and in their respective corners. But when it's not so polarized, then we can just have conversation without as much polarization and tension about being a part of it, if that makes sense. And as a therapist, I feel like I can offer somewhat of a nuanced and neutral position so that we can all find some common ground to come to meet at and try and rectify this issue as a society. Because one thing that I've also found in our approach to addressing mass shootings, I found that when we try and address it on a societal level, we get overwhelmed. And we often feel like, oh, it's just too much. It's just too big of a problem. And so we just throw our hands up in defeat oftentimes. And we do that for a ton of issues. And I understand that because you see these things consistently happen. You see children getting literally blown to smithereens in a school and nothing being done about it, especially at the societal level. And so it can feel disconcerting and it can feel discouraging and make you just want to say, you know what, whatever, let me just brace for it myself. But what's also happening is you begin to develop this hardness and this coldness or desensitization toward violence and death. And that stuff internalizes. And although your brain maybe is shut off to it in the sense that like you don't feel you're not surprised when it happens, maybe shocked, but not surprised. So yeah, that's happening in your brain, but your body is housing that trauma and it's responding in various ways. And it's coming out in various ways. And I think that's why we're seeing a pervasive number of them even continue. At least that's part of it. Anyway, all that to say, I kind of want to have a conversation around it, a comprehensive conversation around it. And I want us to come to some conclusions that aren't steeped in partisanship, but rather steeped in the love and the community that's needed most right now. So stick around if you're interested in that. And yeah, let's get started. So the first point that I want to address in this space is that, and it's kind of like a misconception that I want to address, mental illness is the sole cause for mass shootings and the growth in mass shootings that we're seeing. That's so patently limited. I won't say false, but it's extremely limited, and it's limited in a way that, as I said, prevents us from having a comprehensive approach toward addressing this problem. I recognize that you're probably thinking, Rachel,
how isn't this classified as a mental illness?
Because if you're a kind of person that would take a gun and go shoot up randos in a space that you do not know for the sake of being angry or frustrated, right? You have to be mentally unstable to some degree, if not to the fullest degree. I get what you're saying, and yes, I validate that. And of course, that's true. These people are obviously mentally unstable in a sense. However, that's only half the picture. Matter of fact, maybe even like 1/3 of the picture. Because the truth is, yeah, they're mentally unstable, but when we think of that term, typically it's associated with something similar to like psychosis or something similar to their thinking capacity is limited or that they have some mental deficit. And the truth of the matter is, guys, that's just not the truth, in part because the research just doesn't bear that out. Statistics show that only about 10% of mass shootings were done by people mass shootings in any regard, and also just for context, mass shootings in this context, what is classified as a technical mass shooting. The research actually shows that only about 10% of mass shootings, again, 4 more people that were killed, were committed by people with psychosis. So that means the other 90%, at least diagnosable psychosis. Obviously, that's relative because mental illness is something that has to be diagnosed by a professional, not just like something you just say, although I know within our therapy culture, everybody is a mental health expert. Nevertheless, a diagnosable, treated, like history of treatment within a facility by a credentialed physician or a credentialed clinician, the research just doesn't bear it out. And I'm not negating the fact that, there are a lot of people misdiagnosed, underdiagnosed, or not diagnosed at all. And a lot of those people probably could potentially be people who have committed mass shootings without question. I don't doubt that, especially if you think about people who typically commit mass shootings. One of the variables that lead to that is past abuse, high ACEs score, past trauma, and past isolation, history of isolation, and all of those things that contributed to their mental state being one, or their lives being one where they go out and commit heinous murders. So in those sort of settings, can I see a situation where they actually don't get the treatment that they need because they were either poorly taken care of or not taken care of at all? Absolutely. So I'm not negating the fact that, all that to say, I'm not negating the fact that mental illness doesn't play a factor, but because I know that when we think of mental illness, especially of someone who is committing a mass murder in that way, we immediately go straight to psychosis, and it completely dismisses the truth and the pains of these people's lives, right? It completely dismisses the fact that you could also be in that position had you gone through the similar things that they'd gone through. Not that you would, right? Everybody's level of tolerance is different. Everybody has their limit of trauma, essentially. And so some people's trauma is just enough to make them resilient and strong and keep going. And then some people's trauma is a notch over that will make them break and lose it, right? And do something kind of crazy or out of character and dangerous, like a mass shooting, right? It's not that the people who are committing these murders are necessarily mentally well, but rather, what are the variables that contributed to them being in this mental state that they're in? And we don't want to just relegate it to, this just crazy nut job who just went out because he hated everybody, which that'll be talked about in point 2. He hated everybody, so he just thought that he just wanted to go shoot and kill everybody because he hated people. He hated people, or worse, he was crazy. He was out of his mind. Oh my God, what could we have done? We can't help that kind of a person. He's crazy. And that's just not true. Oftentimes, mental illness is born out of significant trauma, significant isolation, significant feelings of loneliness and lostness. And so many men are just kind of floating in the abyss, walking around hoping, looking for some change, looking for some hope, looking for some respite from their miserable lives or their misery in general. I'm going to post something actually here that I saw on Facebook the other day that was somewhat the impetus for this video, if I'm being honest. This guy wrote this in the comment section, and I'll be in the comments. I ain't gonna lie to you. I'll be in the comments, y'all. I don't know why I be in the comments to the extent that I do, but I am. And anyway, I can't tell you the amount of times that I hear this from men. They say something like, if it wasn't, my dad actually would say this all the time. If it wasn't for my mom, I wouldn't be here, and I would just be done with it. I'm holding on for them, or I'm holding on for them. And I would just always think like, why is life so miserable for you? Why are you this unhappy? And then the older I got and the more I started to feel the weight of responsibilities of being an adult and of being a contributing member of society, especially as well. And it gets even more complicated when you start talking about the expectations of different races of men. But anyway, when you start to really, really process the expectations of masculinity and how patriarchy has created a system where men have to provide and perform with little to no help and ability to be dependent at all, that's a lot of weight. And it can feel daunting. And if you haven't been taught a healthy form of masculinity and a healthy, more comprehensive, nuanced, well-balanced, evolved form of masculinity, one that isn't solely relegated on how you perform, how you show up, what you provide, then yeah, that burden can be a lot. One that nobody can bear, one that nobody can perform to the max. But guess what? If you don't perform it to the max in traditional masculinity and patriarchy, you feel inadequate, you feel incompetent, and you feel the weight of all of that incompetence. But guess what? Also in traditional masculinity and patriarchy, you can't be incompetent. There isn't any room for incompetence. So now you have these compounded feelings of I'm incompetent, but I'm not supposed to be incompetent. And also I have people that are depending on me, or a world that is expecting me to produce people that are dependent on me so that and perform well and make sure that I show up for them. That's a lot. And so men often retreat. And then after they retreat, then here comes the isolation, the loneliness, the pervasive negative thoughts, the hiding in dark chat rooms, the saying crazy stuff on the internet behind computer screens. And they just are fed over and over and over with things that perpetuate their feelings of isolation, loneliness, and nothingness, right? And then the worst of the worst happens. They start to ruminate and think through and process some of the worst things. And then we haven't even talked about the traumatic pieces behind it, which we'll get into in point 2. But my point is, it's more than mental illness. It's about negative experiences oftentimes. And those negative experiences lead people to break. They're not crazy. They're not psychotic. They're hurting. Typically. Again, I can't paint with a super broad brush here. I recognize that I am, but let's not oversimplify it, because when we oversimplify it, then we absolve ourselves of some of the responsibility that we can play. I'm not saying that you're responsible for any mass shooting that has happened. What I'm saying is we can make differences in what would seem menial ways, but probably in the long term are way more profound. And I'll have an example of that actually later on in the video. Okay, point 2. Okay, this one is going to get me in trouble, but I'm sorry, I have to say it. Yes, the majority of mass shooters are white, no doubt about it. 60% of mass shootings that are done are committed by white people, without question. And also, other races of men do it as well. And when I say white people, majority are men. Everybody just knows that majority of mass shootings are done by men. So let's just kind of put that out there. Nevertheless, and then the few that are done by women, that men are included within them. Men are the majority of people who murder, the majority of people who commit violence in a society. Throughout history, throughout societies, no matter the country, no matter the people. That's just the facts. Okay, but saying that to say, yes, the majority of them are done by white boys. And I know that we are often, especially within black circles, I got to be honest, we always kind of like flippantly and laughably talk about, we are the crazy white boy or the crazy white boy archetype. And it's become like a caricature, and it's a funny thing, funny, but also dangerous and scary at the same time. But you know what we do when things get scary and dark, we just laugh, because no other way to deal with trauma oftentimes. And I get it. Nevertheless, as much as that is true, what is also true, and we can't negate, because when we only relegate it to, oh yeah, that's a white boy thing, we miss the fact that the majority of violence perpetuated within black community and all other communities, as I stated, are done by boys. And although we may not commit mass shootings, black people in particular, but even other races, although they may not commit mass shootings at the level that white boys do, the amount of violence and the reasons behind the black boys' violence and other races of violence is often similar, and if not exactly the same as that of why white boys commit violence as well. A rageful young man filled with testosterone, unmitigated testosterone, without any levels of, or without any parameters of control and boundaries, or a man to lead and direct him in his life. It's like a bubbling over volcano, and without the proper parameters around it, and without being healthily harnessed and navigated through, because masculinity in its own right, just as the God-given gift and tool that it is, it's a beautiful gift. It's a really powerful gift. But what Spider-Man Grandpa say?
Remember, with great power comes great responsibility.
Absolutely. And so without harnessing that power, we're all at risk of peril when it comes to masculinity. And I think that that's what's showing out when it comes to unhealthy masculinity. And I think that's what manifests with these mass shootings. We're all at risk of being destroyed when you have a society of young men that feel disillusioned and feel that they are on the brink of loss and the brink of nothingness. When we only relegate it to white boys do this is a white boy thing, we completely miss the fact that no, all boys are doing this to some extent. It's only 60% of them are done by white boys. So that means it's a 40% of others that are committing all of the murders or most of the murders within our society. And the reasons, I'm willing to bet all of my money, the reasons behind why they do them are similar, if not directly parallel to why the white boys do it too. And we don't want to miss that. And we're all either a sister to a brother or boy, a mom, a cousin, or a dad, or whomever. We all play a role in boys' development and growth and experience within the society, just the same as they play a role to one another as well. And so this isn't speaking to women or men in either way. This is speaking to both genders, both political parties, both whatever side of the persuasion you fall on socioeconomically or wherever within society and culture. I'm saying we don't want to just relegate it to whatever stereotype or whatever archetype we have in our mind about who commits mass shootings, because when we do that, we pigeonhole ourselves and we miss the other boys around us that are also hurting, also going through isolation, also and feeling like a loser within a society that he feels like is passing him by, or he feels like he is incapable of performing within. We have to do a good job at addressing that and finding ways on a governmental level, on a social level, and on a family level even, which I know we don't like that word. We have to find better ways of addressing the boys around us and loving on the boys around us and uplifting the boys around us so that we don't all perish at the peril of unmitigated, unharnessed masculinity. Point 3. So there are absolutely laws and regulations that can be put into place to help mitigate this problem. And to say that there aren't, or to gaslight and call it anything else, or to say that it's all these nefarious other variables that will help to prevent it or that will prevent it altogether, it's just absolutely lying. And it's intellectual laziness and also dishonesty. Because the truth of the matter is the research has been done tirelessly. We can do more, to be fair, but the research has been done exhaustively enough to show that although we don't have absolutes to be able to say this person will have committed a mass shooting and so on and so forth, we definitely see themes and patterns, or that point towards some particular laws that could actually work to prevent these mass shootings. For example, red flag laws. A red flag law just basically points to different patterns or trends within a person that make them a red flag to pay attention to, or that point out some of their red flags when they go and purchase a gun. And essentially what it would do is put them on in a database, if you will, and mark them as somebody that may need to be taken a second look over when and if they try and go purchase a gun. Now, I get people's controversial opinions about that, particularly because databases of any kind in a free country, relatively free country, that's a difficult thing to contend with, especially when we know freedom so viscerally and we know autonomy so viscerally. And so it's so intricate to our makeup and to the culture of literally who we are. It's in our DNA as a country. And so when you start talking about databases, it just also harkens back to a time in history where, or not even a time in history, even in other parts of the world where theocracy takes rule and dictatorship takes rule. And that's a scary thought. So I get why people push back against it. But again, guys, you have to also look at the greater picture and what's the alternative. And relatively speaking, and I'm not versed on this completely with regard to the policy side of it, but relatively speaking, what are the alternatives when you have these red flags, if you will, popping up consistently with a certain person, and you have these nervous feelings around, man, they should not have access to guns. But when you see these red flags pop up in people and in their behaviors or previous crimes, and this person is still able to purchase a gun, the majority of mass shooters have had a history of violence to some extent. Not all of them, to be fair. Red flag laws would not have prevented all of them. However, they would have stopped a great deal of them, and they would intervene in a great deal of them as well, because people who commit violence, they don't just start with some mass shooting, something as heinous and consequential as a mass shooting. It always starts incrementally and continues to grow. And there are mechanisms that we can put in place to monitor, watch, and potentially stop them. So All that to say, and there are a ton of other ones too. Again, I'm not completely versed in it. Nevertheless, we have enough research that shows forth some of the things that we can put in place. And this is beyond partisanship. And it wouldn't necessarily tread on our constitutional rights, because many of them would put in place parameters around if you've committed a crime previously, or if you've been a disruptor in your community recently and the people around you deem you unsafe and unfit to carry a deadly weapon. And as I stated, I get the controversy behind that. But the truth is, we have to be willing and able to have these contentious conversations and be honest about the fact that maybe on both sides of this conversation, we'll have to concede some for the sake of literal lives, innocent lives being consistently shot down and mauled as if they are animals in the street, for the sake of just walking to the mall or going to the store or going to school or whatever. Now, I started with that much passion and vigor about the fact that laws can be put in place and there are regulations that can be put in place, and we need to rid ourselves of partisanship. I started there because I'm coming to the other side now too. Guys, we can't continue to live the way we live and engage with other humans the way that we do and expect this to get better. We have a social responsibility to address this at the root and address it like an issue of depression and suicide and social isolation that it actually is. And I mentioned social responsibility here because I know I've been seeing a tenor online for quite a while, actually. I know it's actually pre-existed at the time that I was introduced to it, but nonetheless, I think it's important to point out here. Because men have a history of subjugation of women and oppression of women, and obviously being on top socially, economically, and every other lead that you can input here. Because that is true, I get our inclination toward rejecting this idea and moving more towards feeling like, well, you know what? If boys are in crisis, if boys are going through this stuff, then so be it. It's time for girls to shine or be the center of attention and get the money behind research efforts so that we can learn more about female struggles, whether it be with regard to our health, our reproductive organs, or a million other spaces where women have just been neglected in every capacity for the sake of advancing men. Because in society's warped view and patriarchal view for such a long time, it's been surrounding men, and we're concerned with men's issues because they'll trickle down to women, if you will, right? Some people have explicitly said that, and that's just essentially how we've functioned and how we've ran things. So that in mind, I understand the inclination of women toward the ideology that, like, no, y'all are only concerned about men now because women are surpassing them, and this has nothing to do with us, and we can just wipe our hands with it and be done with it, and we can deal with men on our terms and engage with them on our terms, and who cares about where they are if we engage with them at all. And truthfully, though I am empathetic to that, I really, really am, because I am a victim of male callousness, male abuse, male chauvinism, negative aspects of patriarchy. Well, we really all are. But the reason I have to push back on that is because for this very reason is the main reason why we can't just wipe our hands clean with it. One, we have to cohabitate a world together. We have to coexist in a world and in a society together. And so there just is no room. We don't have the luxury or the privilege to say, no, their issues are theirs and ours are ours, because it's do or die. Literally and figuratively, which is actually scary. And I don't say that callously, but men's issues are our issues. Women's issues are their issues. Do we equally share in the burdens of one another? No. Do we equally give concern and care over the burdens of one another? Absolutely not. Nevertheless, if we engage with men in a way that is callous toward their needs, particularly because we are disproportionately their teachers, because we're disproportionately teachers in general, we're disproportionately their healthcare providers, because we serve in so many roles where they are a part of, we have a responsibility to know about this stuff and also participate in cultivating a society that helps create a world where they feel safe and seen. Bell Hooks actually does a great job in her book at outlining all this stuff way better than I have or am right now. But it essentially says in the book how patriarchy actually does a disservice to everybody, but especially men, because it holds them to this standard that is literally inhuman and no person could reach. But they feel relegated to it, and now they feel like they have to perform all the time, and then they get stuck in the performance loop that eventually annihilates them, right? Be it from some crime and now they're locked away in jail forever, be it via a mass shooting, right? Or be it just retreating in depression and lack of love or lack of experiencing of love and real genuine vulnerability. And we all know no human can exist for a long time without actually being able to be vulnerable or have a safe space for a safe expression and full free expression. So all that in mind, I started with the guns and saying how we need to be honest about the fact that there are regulations and laws that we can put in place to help mitigate this problem. And in addition to that, there are also truths about how we run society and how we personally show up for one another that can be shifted and changed to help address this issue as well. And oftentimes, like I said, we look at solutions to mass shootings as this big, great societal problem that nobody will ever be able to address because it feels so massive and out of our control. But the truth is, in part, that's true. But in other parts, large part, it's not, right? I was watching a TED Talk of a guy who was potentially going to be a mass shooter. And he was talking about how he was going to go to school the next day and commit the shooting. But then the day prior, his friend invited him over. And I think his mom cooked him like an apple pie. And she cooked it specifically because he was coming over. And he talked about how in that moment, that was such an eye-opening moment for him. And it was such a defining moment in shifting his heart posture. Not because her apple pie was absolutely phenomenal, which maybe it was, child, I don't know. But more because in that moment, he felt seen, he felt valued, and he felt like somebody cared. So many people, and we'll take out the gender specific here. So many people in general feel so unseen, so uncared about, and so unheard. And I think as a society, we just do ourselves a disservice by underestimating the power of invisibility, right? The power of not feeling wanted or cared about. It's such an innate human tendency to desire concern and to desire someone to care for you, or to even desire importance and prominence. And then you add all the social narratives that have been thrust into people's brains, especially men, about the need to be big and strong and higher than the rest, and the competitive streak that we have within us. Person doesn't have those things, that can create for a really, really dangerous person emotionally, and then that danger manifesting in crime, in how they engage or lack thereof. So if we want to help prevent this, we have to be honest about the micro ways that we can cultivate love in our own communities, that we can cultivate concern and really being present for people, not just always going straight to the, how you doing? Oh, I'm fine. And then when people do, that's fine. You don't have to harass them. But I just mean, really go the extra mile sometimes and ask a person. And when maybe if you notice that they say fine all the time, then go a step further. Like, how's your family? Tell me about the last time they XYZ, right? Really probe. I know it's such a social taboo, if you will, because we're in this weird space where we are hyper vulnerable, but also heavily isolated as well. And I think we're hyper vulnerable because we're always on our P's and Q's, and we've become desensitized to drama and pain and trauma in general because we're constantly inundated with it, with the constant stimulation of social media, all that goes on in that cesspool of a place. So to some degree, we're desensitized to heightened vulnerability and things that would historically make us uneasy. We're so accustomed to feeling dramatic and crazy feelings all the time and getting those dopamine spikes all the time, or even cortisol spikes all the time, because we're constantly consuming so many high stress videos and content and conversations. But then what that has also done, though, is just polarize us, which drives us more away from one another. It polarized us and created tension amongst human beings that probably didn't necessarily need to exist. Not that we haven't always disagreed on party lines, political lines, all across different spectrums of disagreement. But it wasn't as prevalent and we weren't talking about it as staunchly as we are now, because conversations and stimulants are always thrown in our face all day long, continually kind of throwing salt in a wound all the time. And so it never gets the opportunity to just heal or get air, right? And step away from the polarization or the polarizing conversations. And then what happens is everything becomes a polarizing conversation or something to be angry or rageful about. So finding ways to unplug from the matrix and actually converse and engage with people can genuinely go a long way. And with regard to this mass shooting crisis that we're just seem like we have no out from, love is a strong tool that we should not dismiss, nor should we minimize. Yeah, we should absolutely address it from the political level. Absolutely. Yeah, we should absolutely address it even from the corporate spaces, right? We can have a deep conversation about SSRIs. We can talk about the pharmaceutical company and how the infusion of more drugs to young people. We can absolutely have the infusion of more drugs to young people at younger and younger ages. Yeah, we're evolving within our healthcare system, but there are a lot of things that feel and are relatively nefarious, and they are worthy of at least further study. I have no problem in saying that, even as a professional, a mental health professional. I'm leery of a few things too that I would never be publicly open about without doing full examination and reading over. But at first glance, there are some things that I am leery about within this space and how we're evolving childhood, right? Jonathan Haidt talks about in his book, The Anxious Generation. He talks a great deal about the great rewiring of children's brains, essentially, and what that's going to mean and the implications that's going to have in the future. Those are conversations that definitely need to be had when we discuss mass shootings. And it's okay to have those conversations, the sociological level around what can be done. But also, y'all know me. What can you do? That'll always be my infamous question. I'm always wanting to challenge our listeners, the family. What is it that you can do? Is it a little boy that perhaps lives in your neighborhood that needs a pair of cleats, but he can't afford them this season, so now he's out for the season? Or I don't know. And that's always just one that I typically go to. Or is there a man who perhaps maybe needs, I don't know, some money for a job interview, or maybe just a listening ear, and we just pass him by every day and we don't really have conversation with him? The weird guy at the bank who feels off and or he just never talks to somebody. He just seems weird. Do you ever actually speak to him, or do you just pass judgment on him? The weird guy in your class. Are you stuck on the archetypes that exist in your mind that you don't go the extra mile, or that you have relegated particular guys and particular men to a specific space and it just kind of leaves them there, which then leads them to isolation and loneliness because they struggle? And especially grown-up men, how are you pouring back into young men in your community? What about the boy at your church? Is there a young man that needs conversation, that needs a dinner, that needs a hug from you? Is there a young man around you that can benefit from your wisdom? You're so self-consumed with growing your company, or aspiring to more and getting more success and starting a new business and all these things. Where in your life have you given back? When we see consistent news around mass shootings, each time you see one, I want you guys to feel compelled to, or have that prick your heart, not just in a, oh my God, shaking your head, the world is so sad kind of a way, but prick your heart in a way of thinking through something that you can do to help reach out to lost souls, reach out to hurting hearts. The world is just hurting, and we can allow these things to continue to further polarize us and push us in our partisan corners. Or we can say, it stops today. And to the extent that I can make a difference in this space, that's what I'm going to do. And that's what I'm going to commit to. So that's my challenge today. How can you help stop the next mass shooting? That sounds like a lot. I know. But I actually want you to seriously think about that. What can you do within your power, within your sphere of influence, to help stop the mass shooting? How are you giving back? What little boy needs you? Think about it for real. All right, guys, that's it for me. I love you guys for real. Like, comment, subscribe, share this video with somebody that you know needs to hear it. And yeah, I'll talk to you later. Bye.